What if I told you one empire ruled the world for more than 600 years? An empire that rose from a small tribe in Anatolia and grew powerful enough to challenge Europe, Asia, and Africa at the same time. This was not just another kingdom. This was the Ottoman Empire. From the fall of Constantinople to the gates of Vienna, from the deserts of Arabia to the heart of the Balkans, its shadow covered 3 continents. But what makes this story truly unbelievable is how it began. A tiny frontier state, surrounded by enemies, with almost no chance of survival. So how did it become one of the most feared empires in history? And more importantly, how did something so powerful eventually collapse? This is a story of conquest, ambition, betrayal, and survival. A story where one dynasty changed the course of world history. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe and comment which empire's history you want next. In the late 13th century, the land of Anatolia was broken, fractured into small, struggling states after the collapse of the Seljuk power. War was constant. Borders meant nothing. Survival was everything. And in the middle of this instability, a small tribe moved quietly across the frontier. They were not rich, not powerful. Their leader was a man named Osman I. No one at that time could have imagined what his name would become. Osman didn't inherit a mighty kingdom. He inherited uncertainty. But he understood something others didn't. This chaos was opportunity. Instead of fighting stronger Muslim rivals, Osman turned his attention west toward weakening Byzantine lands. These territories were vulnerable, divided, and unprepared for what was coming. What started as small raids quickly turned into something bigger. Victory brought land, land brought followers. Followers brought power. Warriors, known as Ghazis, joined Osman's cause not just for survival, but for purpose. His forces weren't just expanding territory, they were building momentum. And momentum is dangerous. Soon, small border towns began to fall. Fortresses that once seemed secure were suddenly under Ottoman control. Osman didn't rush blindly. He expanded carefully, step by step, securing every gain. This wasn't luck, this was strategy. By the early 1300s, what started as a minor tribal group had transformed into a rising force, not large enough to dominate, but strong enough to be noticed. And once you are noticed, you are tested. Byzantines, though weakened, were still a major power. They had walls, armies, and history on their side. But they also had something else: complacency. Osman and his warriors didn't rely on tradition. They adapted. They moved fast. They struck where it hurt most. And slowly, the balance began to shift. Then came a turning point. The capture of key territories near the Byzantine frontier opened the door to something bigger: permanent expansion into enemy land. This wasn't raiding anymore. This was conquest. Osman had done something remarkable. He had taken a fragile tribe and turned it into a state, a growing one. But he wouldn't be the one to take it to the next level. Because as his life came to an end, the foundation was ready. The real expansion, the transformation from rising power to unstoppable force would come next, under a new leader, his son, Orhan. And what he would do would change everything. When Osman I died, the Ottomans were no longer just a tribe. They were something new, unstable but rising. And now, leadership passed to his son Orhan. This is where everything changed. Because Orhan didn't just continue expansion, he organized it. The Ottomans needed more than warriors. They needed structure. So Orhan began building something that would define the empire for centuries: a real state. Cities were no longer just targets. They became centers of power. One of the biggest turning points came with the capture of Bursa. This wasn't just another victory. It became the first true Ottoman capital. For the first time, the Ottomans weren't just moving forward, they were settling. And once an empire settles, it grows faster. Administration was introduced. Taxes were organized. Control became stable. But Orhan didn't stop there. He understood something critical. Power isn't just land, it's people. So instead of destroying conquered populations, the Ottomans absorbed them. Different religions, different cultures, allowed to exist under one rule. This created something dangerous for their enemies: loyalty. Because people didn't always resist Ottoman rule. Sometimes, they accepted it. And while stability grew inside the empire, something even bigger was about to happen outside it. An opportunity, a crack in Europe. The Byzantine Empire, once powerful, was now collapsing from within. Civil wars, internal conflict, weak leadership. It was the perfect moment, and Orhan saw it. Instead of waiting, he moved. Ottoman forces crossed into Europe for the first time. This wasn't a raid. This was expansion into a new continent, A foothold was established at Gallipoli, strategic, powerful, and impossible to ignore. Now everything changed. Because the Ottomans were no longer just an Anatolian power, they were now a European threat, and Europe noticed. But by the time they realized what was happening, it was already too late. Because the Ottomans had something no one expected: discipline. Orhan began forming a more structured military system. Not just tribal fighters, but organized forces ready for long-term warfare. This would later evolve into one of the most feared military forces in history. And with every victory, confidence grew. The Ottomans pushed deeper into the Balkans. Territory expanded, influence spread. Resistance came, but it wasn't enough. Because this wasn't chaos anymore. This was controlled expansion, calculated, relentless, and unstoppable. What started as a small tribe under Osman was now becoming a serious power under Orhan, a state with structure, an army with discipline, a vision with direction. But this was only the beginning. Because the empire was about to enter its most aggressive phase yet. New rulers would come, more ambitious, dangerous, and they wouldn't just expand the empire, they would redefine it. Because soon, the Ottomans would set their eyes on something legendary, a city no one had been able to take for centuries, a city that stood between continents, a city that symbolized power itself. Constantinople. By now, the Ottomans were no longer rising, they were advancing fast. After Orhan, new rulers pushed the empire deeper into Europe, and the Balkans began to fall one region at a time. Cities surrendered, armies collapsed, and resistance weakened. With every victory, the Ottomans grew more confident. But at the center of everything, there was one city untouched, unbroken, unconquered: Constantinople. For centuries, this city had stood as the heart of the Byzantine Empire. It had massive walls, a strategic position, and wealth beyond imagination. Every empire wanted it. None could take it. It wasn't just a city, it was a symbol. And the Ottomans knew that until Constantinople fell, their empire would never be complete. Then came a new ruler, young, brilliant, and obsessed with one goal: Mehmed II. He wasn't interested in slow expansion. He wanted history. From the moment he took power, everything focused on one target: Constantinople. But this wasn't going to be easy. The city was protected by massive stone walls, some of the strongest ever built. Armies had tried and failed for centuries, so Mehmed didn't rely on tradition. He changed the game. He built something new: massive cannons, weapons so powerful they could shake the walls themselves. As preparations began, the tension grew. The Byzantine Empire knew what was coming. Inside the city there was fear. Outside the walls, an army was gathering thousands of soldiers, ships ready at sea, weapons positioned. This wasn't just another siege. This was everything. In 1453, it began the fall of Constantinople. Cannons fired, the ground shook. Walls that had stood for centuries began to crack. Day after day, attack after attack, the Ottomans pushed forward. But Constantinople didn't fall easily. Defenders fought with everything they had. Streets turned into battlegrounds. Every inch was contested. But Mehmed had one advantage: relentless pressure. He attacked from land and from sea. Even when blocked, he found a way. In one of the most shocking moves in military history, Ottoman ships were dragged over land, bypassing defenses, and launched into the harbor. The city was surrounded completely. There was no escape. And then the final assault came. The walls finally broke. Ottoman forces poured in. Fighting moved from outside to inside, and after centuries of standing strong, Constantinople fell. The Byzantine Empire ended just like that, and everything changed. Because this wasn't just a victory, it was a turning point in world history. Constantinople became the new Ottoman capital, a bridge between continents, a center of power. And from this moment, the Ottomans were no longer just an empire, they were a superpower. But with power comes something inevitable: conflict. Because now, the Ottomans stood face to face with the greatest powers of the world. And they weren't done expanding. Not even close. After the fall of Constantinople, the Ottomans didn't slow down, they accelerated. The empire expanded deeper into Europe, further into the Middle East, and across North Africa. Territory wasn't just growing, it was exploding. But the true peak of Ottoman power came under one ruler: Suleiman the Magnificent, a man feared by enemies and respected by allies. Under his rule, the empire reached a level no one could ignore. This wasn't just expansion anymore, this was dominance. Suleiman didn't just lead armies, he controlled a system. Laws were organized, justice was structured, and administration became powerful and efficient. The empire wasn't just strong on the battlefield, it was stable from within, and that made it even more dangerous. Ottoman armies pushed into the heart of Europe. One of the most dramatic moments came when they reached the gates of Vienna, a direct challenge to Europe itself. The message was clear: no place was out of reach. At the same time, the Ottomans dominated the seas. Their navy controlled key trade routes across the Mediterranean, turning water into territory. Trade flourished, wealth increased, and influence spread. Inside the empire, something remarkable was happening. Different religions, cultures, and languages existed under one rule. Instead of forcing one identity, the Ottomans managed diversity, and that created stability. People didn't just live under the empire, they functioned within it. Cities became centers of art, science, and architecture. Mosques, markets, and palaces reflected a civilization at its peak. Everything felt unstoppable, and for a moment it was. But no empire stays at the top forever. While the Ottomans were expanding, the world was changing slowly at first, then faster. New powers began rising in Europe. Stronger armies, better weapons, new strategies, and something else, internal pressure. As the empire grew larger, it became harder to control. Corruption started to appear. Leadership weakened. Decisions became slower. The same system that once created strength now began to show cracks. And once cracks appear, they spread. The Ottomans were still powerful, still feared but no longer untouchable. Because now they faced a different kind of challenge, not just enemies from outside, but problems from within. And that's where the real decline begins. Because empires don't collapse in one moment. They fade. Slowly. Then, suddenly. Empires don't collapse in a single moment. They weaken quietly, and by the time the world notices, it's already too late. After the golden age of Suleiman the Magnificent, the Ottoman Empire still looked powerful. The land was vast, the armies were large, and the name still carried fear. But inside, something was breaking. Leadership began to change. Strong, decisive rulers were replaced by weaker sultans, men more interested in palace life than empire building. Power slowly shifted away from the battlefield and into closed rooms. Corruption grew. Positions were no longer earned, they were bought. Decisions became slower, systems became weaker, and control started slipping. And when control slips, problems multiply. The military, once the empire's greatest strength, began to fall behind. While Europe was developing new weapons, tactics, and technology, the Ottomans stayed the same. What once made them unstoppable now made them outdated. On the battlefield, that difference became deadly. Defeats started to increase. Territories were lost. Confidence dropped. But the biggest threat wasn't just defeat, it was comparison. Because while the Ottoman Empire struggled, Europe was rising fast. Nations like Britain, France, and Austria were becoming more powerful, more organized, and more advanced. Trade routes shifted, economies grew, influence expanded, and slowly, the balance of power changed. The Ottomans were no longer leading the world. They were trying to keep up with it, and they were failing. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the empire had a new reputation, the sick man of Europe. Not because it had fallen, but because it was clearly weakening. European powers saw it and they didn't ignore it. They took advantage. Piece by piece, they began to interfere. Territories broke away. Revolts increased. Foreign influence grew stronger inside the empire. The Ottomans tried to fix it. Reforms were introduced. Systems were updated. Leaders attempted to modernize the empire. But it wasn't enough. Because the problems were too deep, too old, too widespread. It wasn't just about fixing the system anymore, it was about saving it. And that's much harder. By the early 20th century, the empire was barely holding together, still standing, but fragile, surrounded by enemies, divided internally, and falling behind globally. And then came the moment that would decide everything. A global war, World War I, unlike anything the world had ever seen. Because this time, it wouldn't just weaken the empire, it would end it, completely. By the early 20th century, the Ottoman Empire was still alive, but just barely, weakened from within, surrounded from outside. And then, the world went to war. In 1914, the empire made a decision that would change everything. It entered World War I, not as the strongest power, but as a desperate one hoping to survive, hoping to recover. But war doesn't fix weak empires. It exposes them. The Ottomans found themselves fighting on multiple fronts against powerful enemies who were better equipped and better prepared. Battles were brutal. Resources ran low, soldiers were exhausted, and the system couldn't keep up. There were moments of resistance, moments where the empire fought back with everything it had. But it wasn't enough. Because this wasn't just a war of armies. It was a war of endurance. And the Ottomans had already been weakened for too long. By 1918, it was over. Defeat. The empire that once ruled 3 continents collapsed. Territories were taken, control was lost, and the Ottoman world was dismantled. After more than 600 years, the empire was gone. But the story didn't end there. From the ruins, something new began to rise. A new leader emerged, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, determined, focused, unwilling to accept defeat as the final chapter. He didn't try to rebuild the empire. He did something different. He built a nation. Through resistance, war, and bold reform, he pushed back against foreign control and redefined the future. In 1923, a new country was born, Turkey. The empire was gone, but its legacy remained. Centuries of history of conquest, power, culture, and transformation didn't disappear. They evolved, because the Ottoman Empire wasn't just about land. It was about influence, about identity, about a story that shaped the world for generations. From a small tribe under Osman I to a global superpower, to collapse and rebirth. This wasn't just the rise and fall of an empire. It was proof of something bigger. Even when power fades, history doesn't.